The shot rang out across the valley, cutting through the crisp morning air like a knife, and Charlotte Abernathy froze mid-step on Sacramento's dusty Main Street. It was 1878, and California's once lawless gold rush territory had calmed some in recent years, but not enough to make a woman traveling alone feel truly safe. Charlotte clutched her carpetbag tighter against her side, its meager contents a change of clothes, her mother's tarnished locket, and exactly $7.32 representing everything she owned in the world. "Nothing to worry about, madam," a shopkeeper called from his doorway, noticing her startled expression. "Just the winter's boy showing off again, hunting rabbits at the edge of town." Charlotte nodded politely, trying to compose herself. At 23 years of age, she traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston after her father's passing, answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher position. Sacramento was growing rapidly, transforming from a gold rush outpost into a proper city, but it still retained enough wild frontier character to make her eastern sensibilities quiver. The boarding house loomed ahead, a 3-story wooden structure with a wide porch and peeling white paint. Charlotte adjusted her travel-worn hat and straightened her back. First impressions mattered, and despite the dust coating her navy blue traveling dress, she was determined to present herself with dignity. "You must be Miss Abernathy," a stern-faced woman announced from the doorway before Charlotte could even mount the steps. "Expected you yesterday. My apologies, Mrs. Holloway. Train was delayed at Promontory, I expect." "Yes, madam, there was a no matter. You're here now, Mrs." Holloway's eyes swept over Charlotte's disheveled appearance with barely concealed disapproval. "Rooms upstairs, last door on the right. School begins Monday. That gives you 3 days to settle in." Charlotte nodded gratefully. "Thank you, I'm eager to." "Rules are simple, Mrs." Holloway continued as if Charlotte hadn't spoken. "No gentlemen callers in rooms. Breakfast at 6, dinner at 6. You miss it, you go hungry. Rent due first of every month. Questions?" "No, madam. Good. Town meeting tonight at the church. You ought to attend. Meet the parents of your future pupils." With that, Mrs. Holloway disappeared into the shadows of the house, leaving Charlotte standing awkwardly on the porch. The room was small but clean, a narrow bed with an iron frame, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a rickety wardrobe, and a single window overlooking the street. Charlotte unpacked her meager belongings, hanging her 3 dresses carefully to remove the worst of the wrinkles. Her father's watch she placed on the small bedside table, the ticking a comforting reminder of home. After washing the travel dust from her face and changing into her best dress, a modest dark green wool with a high collar, Charlotte headed for the church. The setting sun cast the town in golden light, softening the rough edges of hastily constructed buildings and lending a certain charm to the frontier settlement. The church was filled with townspeople when she arrived, ranchers in their Sunday best, merchants, miners, and families with children of all ages. Charlotte felt dozens of curious eyes upon her as she slipped into an empty seat near the back. Women whispered behind gloved hands, and several men nodded respectfully in her direction. "Folks, if I could have your attention," called a gray-haired man at the front of the room. "Got a few matters to discuss tonight, including the road improvements and that troublesome business with the Kennedy Ranch. But first, I'd like to introduce our new schoolteacher, Miss Charlotte Abernathy, just arrived from Boston." Charlotte rose uncertainly as all heads turned toward her. "Stand up straight, girl, let them see you," a woman whispered from behind. Charlotte managed a smile and a small curtsy. "I'm very pleased to be here in Sacramento, and I look forward to meeting all of my students on Monday morning." A smattering of polite applause followed, and Charlotte sat down quickly, her cheeks burning. The meeting proceeded with discussions of irrigation problems, disputes over property lines, and the ongoing railroad expansion. Charlotte listened attentively, trying to understand the community she joined. And finally, the gray-haired man, Mayor Simmons, as Charlotte had learned, announced, a reminder about the annual Founders' Day celebration next month. "Mrs. Patterson has graciously offered to head the committee again this year." As the meeting concluded, Charlotte found herself surrounded by parents eager to introduce themselves and their children. "Miss Abernathy, these are my twins, Samuel and Sarah," a plump woman in a calico dress announced. 8 years old and smart as whips, though Samuel's got a mischievous streak a mile wide. My Joseph will be in your advanced reading group, another woman said proudly. He's already finished McGuffey's fourth reader. Charlotte smiled and nodded, trying desperately to commit names and faces to memory. The children stared at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion, no doubt comparing her to their previous teacher. Don't you worry about overwhelming our new teacher, a deep voice cut through the chatter. The crowd parted slightly to reveal a tall man with broad shoulders and a weathered face. Unlike the other men present, he hadn't bothered to remove his hat, a wide-brimmed Stetson that shadowed his features. She'll have plenty of time to learn all about your young'uns come Monday. Daniel Xavier, the man said, extending a calloused hand. My boy Illy will be in your class. He's 10. Charlotte accepted the handshake, noting the strength in his grip and the intensity in his gray eyes. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Xavier. Most folks just call me Xavier, he replied. A boy peered out from behind him, a solemn child with the same gray eyes as his father, his dark hair falling across his forehead. This here's Illy. Say hello to your teacher, son. Hello, madam, the boy said quietly, not quite meeting her eyes. Hello, Illy, Charlotte replied warmly. I'm looking forward to having you in my class. The boy nodded but remained half hidden behind his father. There was something in his demeanor that tugged at Charlotte's heart, a wariness, a sadness perhaps, that seemed too heavy for a child his age. Xavier runs the largest cattle ranch outside of town, Mayor Simmons explained. The Flying X, been here since before Sacramento really got going. Daniel Xavier's expression remained impassive. We should be heading back, got an early start tomorrow. He placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder. Miss Abernathy. With a tip of his hat, he turned and walked away, the boy trailing behind him. Charlotte watched them go, struck by the contrast between the man's imposing presence and the boy's withdrawn manner. Don't mind Xavier, a woman whispered beside her. He's been that way since his wife passed, going on 3 years now. I'm sorry to hear that, Charlotte replied, watching as father and son disappeared through the church doors. Mary Xavier was a fine woman, taken by fever when the boy was 7. Xavier's never been the same, keeps to himself mostly, except for ranch business. The woman patted Charlotte's arm. Just so you know, in case Illy's a bit different from the other children. Over the next several days, Charlotte settled into her role as Sacramento's schoolteacher. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room structure with rows of wooden desks facing a blackboard. 23 students ranging from 6 to 14 years of age arrived on Monday morning, scrubbed clean and clutching their readers and slates. Illy Xavier sat in the middle row, quiet and attentive but rarely volunteering answers. His schoolwork was neat and thorough, revealing an intelligence that impressed Charlotte. During recess, while the other children played boisterous games in the yard, Illy often sat alone with a book or whittled small figures from scraps of wood with a pocket knife. Charlotte tried several times to draw him out, inviting him to read aloud or asking his opinion on story characters. But his responses, while polite, remained brief and guarded. It became something of a personal challenge to her, finding a way to connect with the solemn boy. 2 weeks into the term, Charlotte assigned an essay on my family. The next morning, Illy approached her desk before class began, his expression troubled. Miss Abernathy, I don't think I can write the essay, he said quietly. Why not, Illy? Charlotte asked gently. It's just me and Pa, he explained, eyes fixed on his scuffed boots. And Pa's gone all day working the ranch. There's not much to tell. Charlotte's heart ached for him. A family isn't always large to be important, Illy. Why don't you write about what you and your father do together? Or perhaps about your ranch, Illy hesitated. Could I write about my mother instead? Pa doesn't talk about her much, but I remember some things. Charlotte reached out and briefly touched his shoulder. That would be perfect, Illy. I'd very much like to read about her. The essay Illy turned in 2 days later was unlike anything Charlotte expected from a 10-year-old boy. Written in careful penmanship, it described Mary Xavier through a child's loving eyes, how she sang while she worked, the special ribbon she wore in her hair on Sundays, her hands always smelling of baking bread and lavender soap. The final lines brought tears to Charlotte's eyes. Pa keeps mother's things in a trunk. Sometimes at night I hear him open it. I think he misses her singing too. When school ended that day, Charlotte was surprised to see Daniel Xavier waiting outside rather than only making his usual solitary walk home. The rancher nodded curtly as she emerged from the schoolhouse. "Mr. Xavier," Charlotte greeted him. "This is unexpected." "Needed supplies from the mercantile," he explained, his expression unreadable beneath his hat brim. "Thought I'd save Ellie the walk home." He glanced past her to where the children were spilling out of the building. "How's he doing? With his lessons, I mean." "Very well," Charlotte replied honestly. "He's bright and attentive, a thoughtful boy." Xavier's weather-beaten face softened slightly. Mary, his mother, she taught him his letters before he was 4, had plans for him to go to college back east someday. Charlotte nodded, suddenly understanding the boy's advanced reading skills. "He wrote a beautiful essay about her," she said carefully, watching the man's reaction. "If you'd like to read it." "No," he interrupted, his voice rough. Then more gently, "No, thank you, Miss Abernathy." Ellie appeared at Charlotte's side, his face brightening at the sight of his father. "Pa, you came to town. Thought we might stop at Miller's for some hard candy before heading back," Xavier said, ruffling his son's hair with uncharacteristic tenderness. "If that's all right with you." Ellie's smile, the first genuine smile Charlotte had seen from him, transformed his serious face. "Yes, sir." As they walked away, Charlotte noticed the boy chattering animatedly to his father, so different from his quiet demeanor at school. Daniel Xavier listened intently, one hand resting protectively on his son's shoulder. There was something about the pair that tugged at Charlotte's heart, the way they leaned slightly toward each other as they walked, two souls weathering loss together. The following Sunday, Charlotte attended services at the church and was surprised to see Daniel and Ellie Xavier seated near the back. The rancher looked uncomfortable in his Sunday suit, tugging occasionally at his collar, but his expression softened whenever he glanced at his son beside him. After the service, Charlotte found herself walking behind them as the congregation filed out into the churchyard. She overheard a snippet of conversation between father and son. "Can we visit Mother today?" Ellie asked quietly. Xavier's voice was gentle. "Course we can, son." "Brought fresh flowers from Mrs. Peterson's garden just for that." Charlotte deliberately slowed her pace, not wanting to intrude on their private moment, but Ellie spotted her and surprisingly waved. "Miss Abernathy, are you going to the picnic?" he called. Charlotte hesitated. "I hadn't planned to. You should come," Ellie said with unexpected animation. "Everyone brings food, and Mr. Jenkins plays the fiddle, and last year there was a 3-legged race." Daniel Xavier had turned back, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and resignation. "What my son is trying to say, Miss Abernathy, is that the church picnic is something of a tradition here after Sunday service. You'd be welcome to join, of course." "That's very kind," Charlotte replied, touched by the invitation, "but I wouldn't want to impose on your family time." A shadow crossed Xavier's face. "We're heading to the cemetery first," he said quietly, "but the picnic goes on most of the afternoon." "Please come," Ellie added, his gray eyes so like his father's hopeful. Charlotte found she couldn't refuse. "I'd be delighted then. Though I'm afraid I haven't prepared anything to contribute." "No one will mind," Xavier assured her. "Plenty of food to go around." The picnic was held in a meadow behind the church, where quilts and blankets had been spread on the grass, laden with baskets of food. Children ran and played, their Sunday best already showing signs of vigorous activity. Adults gathered in conversational groups, the men discussing crops and cattle prices while women exchanged recipes and town gossip. Charlotte felt somewhat awkward at first, still an outsider despite her position in the community. But several of her students' mothers made a point of including her, introducing her to those she hadn't yet met. "Miss Abernathy," Ellie's voice called from across the meadow. He ran toward her, slightly breathless, his father following at a more measured pace. "Pa says you can share our blanket if you want. Mrs. Miller gave us enough fried chicken for 10 people. Charlotte glanced at Xavier, who nodded confirmation. "My housekeeper tends to cook as if we're feeding a roundup crew," he explained. "We'd be obliged for the help." The Xavier blanket was spread under an oak tree at the edge of the gathering, offering a view of the festivities while maintaining a certain separation that Charlotte suspected was deliberate on the rancher's part. The food was indeed plentiful: golden fried chicken, cornbread, potato salad, and apple pie. Mrs. Miller has been with us since, Xavier paused. For about 3 years now, runs the house and spoils this one. He nudged his son with his elbow, earning a rare smile from the boy. She makes the best apple pies, Illy informed Charlotte solemnly. But she can't sing like Mother did. An uncomfortable silence fell. Xavier busied himself with serving food, his movements methodical and precise. I understand you've been in Sacramento a long time, Mr. Xavier, Charlotte said, hoping to ease the tension. He nodded. Came out in '53 during the gold rush, like most. Found out pretty quick that there was more money in feeding miners than being one. His weathered face relaxed slightly as he remembered. Started with 5 cows and a broken-down wagon, built it up from there. Pa has the biggest herd in the county now, Illy said proudly, and the best horses too. Xavier's expression softened as he looked at his son. Your mother's father was a horse breeder back in Kentucky. She had an eye for horseflesh like I've never seen. He seemed surprised by his own words, as if he hadn't meant to share that detail. Charlotte sensed an opening. Illy tells me you're teaching him to train horses. Boy needs to know the business, Xavier replied, but there was pride in his voice. Got away with the nervous ones, gentle touch like his mother. As the afternoon progressed, Charlotte observed the subtle dynamic between father and son, the deep bond evident in small gestures and shared glances, but also a careful distance, as if both were afraid of reopening wounds not fully healed. Daniel Xavier was clearly a devoted father, but there was a remoteness to him, a part walled off and inaccessible. When he ran off to join some of his schoolmates in a game, Xavier watched him go with a mixture of pride and concern. He's a good boy, Charlotte said quietly. You should be proud. I am, Xavier replied. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing right by him out at the ranch with just me in the hands. Mary would have known better how to handle. He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. His quiet nature, Charlotte suggested. Xavier nodded. He wasn't always so solemn. After Mary passed, he just withdrew, doesn't talk much anymore except about horses and sometimes school. He glanced at her. Seems to like your teaching, though, mentions you at supper sometimes. Charlotte felt a rush of warmth at the thought. He's one of my brightest students. His essay about his mother was beautifully written. Xavier looked away. Mary would have liked you. She set great store by education. After a moment, he added gruffly, thank you for being kind to him. It's not kindness, Mr. Xavier, it's simply recognizing a special child. For the first time, Daniel Xavier smiled directly at her, a genuine smile that transformed his stern features and crinkled the corners of his gray eyes. Call me Daniel, Miss Abernathy. Mr. Xavier was my father, and he was a much more dignified man than I'll ever be. That Sunday marked a turning point in Charlotte's relationship with both Xaviers. At school, Illy began to participate more freely, occasionally staying after class to show her his drawings or discuss a book he was reading. And Daniel, to the evident surprise of the townspeople, began to appear more regularly in town, often timing his errands to coincide with the end of the school day. Sometimes he would merely tip his hat to Charlotte as he collected his son. Other times, he might engage her in brief conversation about Illy's progress or offer her a ride if rain threatened. Each interaction was marked by a careful politeness, but Charlotte couldn't help noticing the way his expression softened when he looked at her, or how he seemed to find reasons to prolong their conversations. October brought cooler weather and preparations for Sacramento's Founders' Day celebration. The entire town was involved in planning the event, which would feature a parade, contests, a dance, and a communal feast. Miss Abernathy, the school children always perform a recitation, Mrs. Patterson informed her during a planning meeting. Nothing elaborate, just a patriotic poem or historical speech. Mrs. Henderson always had them do Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, but we thought you might want to select something different. Charlotte considered the suggestion. I'd like to have them perform a tableau of California's history with narration and perhaps a few songs. The older students could take speaking roles, while the younger ones could participate in the scenes. The idea was met with enthusiasm, and Charlotte threw herself into the preparations, writing a simple script and assigning parts. Illy, to her surprise, volunteered to narrate one section about the gold rush, his usual reticence giving way to genuine interest in the project. The week before Founders Day, Charlotte was working late at the schoolhouse, painting backdrop scenery for the performance when a knock at the door startled her. Daniel Xavier stood on the threshold, hat in hand. "Evening, Miss Abernathy." Illy forgot his reader, and he's fussing about practicing his part. His eyes took in the colorful backdrop spread across the floor. "Looks like quite a production you've got planned." Charlotte smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face, belatedly realizing she probably had paint on her cheek. "I'm afraid I got a bit carried away. The children are so excited about performing." "Illy hasn't talked about anything else all week," Daniel admitted, stepping into the schoolroom, "even practicing in front of the mirror, which I never thought I'd see." He moved closer to examine the backdrop. "This is fine work. Didn't know school teaching included scenic artistry." "My father was a theater set designer in Boston," Charlotte explained. "I used to help him paint backdrops during summer breaks. It's not quite as grand as his work, but it should serve for our modest production." Daniel studied the painting, a rendering of Sutter's Mill and the American River, with appreciation. "It's a sight better than anything we've had before. The children will be proud to stand in front of it." He hesitated, then added, "Can I help you with anything?" "Feels wrong to leave a lady working alone after dark." Charlotte was about to decline automatically but reconsidered. The backdrop was large and she'd been struggling to move it on her own. "Actually, if you could help me hang this once it's dry, I'd be grateful." "It's rather unwieldy for one person." Daniel nodded, setting his hat aside and rolling up his shirt sleeves. "Just tell me where you want it." They worked together for the next hour, Daniel helping to complete the painting and then constructing a simple frame to support the backdrop. Charlotte was surprised by his deft handling of the paintbrush and his eye for detail. "You have a steady hand for a cattleman," she observed as he carefully outlined a gold miner's sluice box. A faint smile touched his lips. "Used to sketch a bit, years back, nothing fancy, just horses mostly." "Illy seems to have inherited your talent. His drawings are quite good for his age." Daniel's expression warmed. "That would be Mary's influence. She could draw anything: flowers, faces, landscapes, had a sketchbook filled with scenes from back home in Kentucky." His voice softened with remembrance. "She drew Illy when he was born, tiny fingers and all. I still have it." Charlotte noticed he could speak of his wife more easily now, the memories bringing a gentle nostalgia rather than raw pain. "Illy told me she wore a special ribbon in her hair," Charlotte said carefully. Daniel nodded, his hands stilling on the paintbrush. "Blue satin. Brought it with her from Kentucky when we married. Said it was the same color as the bluegrass country sky." He cleared his throat. "Kept it tied around her Bible on Sundays when she wasn't wearing it." They worked in companionable silence for a while, and Charlotte found herself increasingly aware of Daniel's presence, the subtle scent of leather and pine that clung to him, the careful precision of his movements, the occasional brush of his arm against hers as they maneuvered the backdrop. When they finished, Daniel stepped back to survey their work. "The children will be mighty impressed," he said with satisfaction. "You've brought something special to this school, Miss Abernathy." "Charlotte," she said impulsively. "If I'm to call you Daniel, you should call me Charlotte. At least when we're not in front of the students." He studied her face for a moment, his gray eyes intent. "Charlotte," he repeated, as if testing the name, "it suits you." Standing there in the lamplight of the schoolroom, paint smudged and surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor, Charlotte felt something shift between them, a new awareness, a possibility opening like a flower to the sun. Daniel broke the moment first, glancing at the clock on the wall. "It's getting late, I should see you home." "There's no need, it's nearly 9 and there's no moon tonight," he said firmly. "I'll walk you to the boarding house." The night air was crisp with the promise of frost, the sky a vast expanse of stars overhead. They walked in silence for a few minutes, their breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. "Illy tells me you're coming to Founders Day," Charlotte said at last. Daniel nodded. "Wouldn't miss his performance. Haven't been to the dance in years, though." "No?" Charlotte asked, trying to sound merely conversational. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Wasn't much cause for celebration after Mary passed, but it's time Illy had some normal experiences, I reckon. Boy should know there's more to life than just working cattle and grieving what's lost. At the steps of the boarding house, Daniel paused. "Thank you for what you're doing for Illy. It means more than I can say, seeing him come out of his shell." "He's a remarkable boy," Charlotte replied softly. "You've raised him well, Daniel," he shook his head slightly. "Done my best, but a boy needs more than just a father's rough handling, needs gentleness too." His eyes met hers in the darkness. "Good night, Charlotte." "Good night, Daniel." Charlotte watched him walk away, a tall figure dissolving into the night, and felt a curious ache in her chest, not sadness exactly, but a yearning for something she hadn't known she was missing until now. Founders' Day dawned clear and cold, the town buzzing with excitement. Banners hung across the main street, and the smell of roasting meats and baking pies filled the air. The children's performance was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the town square before the feast and evening dance. Charlotte arrived early at the makeshift stage, helping her nervous students into their costumes and reviewing lines one last time. Parents began gathering on benches set up in front of the stage, and Charlotte's heart raced with a combination of pride and anxiety. This was her first major event as Sacramento's teacher, and she desperately wanted it to go well. "Miss Abernathy," Illy called, running up to her with uncharacteristic animation. "Pa's here, and he brought Mrs. Miller and some of the ranch hands too." Charlotte glanced toward the audience and spotted Daniel Xavier in the third row, freshly shaven and wearing a clean black suit. He caught her eye and nodded respectfully, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The performance exceeded Charlotte's expectations. The children remembered their lines, the songs were mostly in tune, and the audience responded with enthusiastic applause after each scene. Illy, standing straight and tall as he narrated the Gold Rush segment, spoke his lines clearly and with surprising confidence. When the final tableau concluded a representation of Sacramento's development from mining camp to thriving city, the crowd rose in a standing ovation. Charlotte's cheeks hurt from smiling as she watched her students take their bows, their faces flushed with pride and excitement. "That was a fine show, Miss Abernathy," Mayor Simmons declared afterward, pumping her hand. "Finest children's performance we've seen in Sacramento, I'd wager." Parents crowded around, offering congratulations and thanks. Charlotte accepted their praise graciously while keeping one eye on her students, ensuring they carefully hung up their costumes before racing off to enjoy the fair attractions. "You've done something remarkable here," a familiar voice said behind her. Charlotte turned to find Daniel Xavier watching her, his expression warm. "The children did all the work," she demurred, not without a fine teacher to guide them. He gestured toward Illy, who was carefully stowing his narrator's scrolled script. "I've never seen him so alive." "He has a natural talent for public speaking," Charlotte said. "With some encouragement he could, Miss Abernathy," Illy interrupted, hurrying over to them. "Did I do all right? I think I forgot a word in the part about the miners." "You were perfect," Charlotte assured him, resisting the urge to straighten his already neat collar. "I was just telling your father how proud I am of you," Illy beamed, then looked hopefully at Daniel. "Can we go see the horseshoe throwing contest now?" "Bobby says his pa's going to win, but I told him you could beat anybody," Daniel chuckled. "That sounds like a challenge I can't refuse." He glanced at Charlotte. "Would you care to join us, Miss Abernathy?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Patterson appeared at her elbow. "There you are, Miss Abernathy. We need your help with the judging of the pie contest, you being a neutral party and all." Charlotte hesitated, torn between duty and the appealing prospect of spending more time with the Xaviers. "Go on," Daniel said with understanding. "Founders' Day only comes once a year, and it seems everyone needs the school teacher's attention. Perhaps we'll see you at the dance later." "I'd like that," Charlotte replied, meeting his eyes. Something passed between them, a current of awareness of possibility. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of activities. Charlotte judged pies, diplomatically declaring a tie between Mrs. Miller's apple and Mrs. Jenkins' peach, helped organize the children's sack races, and somehow found time to return to the boarding house to change into her best dress for the evening dance. The town hall had been transformed with paper lanterns and autumn flowers. A small orchestra comprised of local musicians with varying degrees of skill played lively tunes as couples twirled across the wooden floor. Charlotte stood near the refreshment table, watching the proceedings with interest. Though several of the town's unmarried men had asked her to dance, she found herself scanning the room for a particular tall figure. Looking for someone? Charlotte turned to find Daniel Xavier at her elbow, his hair neatly combed and his suit slightly too large as if allowing room to grow. "Your father lets you attend the dance?" Charlotte asked, surprised. Daniel nodded. "Pa says I'm old enough this year, but I have to leave at 9. He glanced around the room. He was right behind me, but Mr. Jenkins stopped him to talk about cattle prices. As if summoned by his son's words, Daniel appeared from the crowd, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the social setting but handsome in his dark suit. He nodded politely to several townspeople as he made his way toward them. "Miss Abernathy," he greeted her, his eyes taking in her blue silk dress, the finest she owned saved for special occasions. "You look very nice." "Thank you," Charlotte replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "Your son was just telling me he's been granted late-night privileges for the dance." Daniel's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Till 9, any later and he'll be useless with the morning chores." He ruffled Daniel's hair affectionately. "Why don't you go get Miss Abernathy some punch, son?" As Daniel hurried off, Daniel shifted his weight slightly, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I'm not much for dancing these days," he said. "But if you'd care to, I'd be delighted," Charlotte said quickly, saving him from having to complete the invitation. Daniel offered his arm and led her onto the dance floor just as the musicians struck up a waltz. His hand at her waist was firm but respectful, maintaining a proper distance between them as they moved in time to the music. "I should warn you," he said quietly, "it's been some years since I've done this. Mary used to say I had 2 left feet." "You're doing perfectly well," Charlotte assured him, though she had noticed his careful concentration on the steps. There was something endearing about this powerful man's earnest effort not to tread on her toes. As they circled the floor, Charlotte was acutely aware of the curious glances from other dancers. Daniel Xavier's presence at a social event was unusual enough. Seeing him dance was apparently cause for considerable interest. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them," he replied simply. "Been the subject of gossip since the day I arrived in this town." "Why is that?" A shadow of a smile crossed his face. "Came here with nothing but determination and more confidence than sense. Made some enemies building the ranch. Made more when I married Mary Kentucky Belle. Taking up with a rough cattleman caused quite the stir." "You must have loved her very much," Charlotte said softly. Daniel's eyes grew distant for a moment. "She was everything bright and gentle in my life when she passed." He paused. "Felt like the sun went out." "I'm sorry," Charlotte said, meaning it deeply. "I lost my father last year." "It's not the same, I know, but loss is loss," Daniel interrupted gently. "Leaves the same kind of emptiness, I expect." The waltz ended, and Daniel led her to the edge of the dance floor. Daniel approached with 2 cups of punch, looking pleased with his successful mission. "Here you are, Miss Abernathy. I didn't spill a drop. Thank you, Daniel. That's very gallant of you." Charlotte accepted the cup with a warm smile. The boy beamed at the praise, then turned to his father. "Mr. Miller says he's getting ready to play his fiddle for the Virginia reel." "Can I watch before I have to go home?" Daniel nodded. "We'll stay for one more dance." The Virginia reel was a lively affair, with 2 long lines of dancers facing each other. Charlotte found herself paired with Daniel again, their hands meeting and parting as they moved through the intricate patterns of the dance. His initial stiffness gradually gave way to a more natural rhythm, and by the end, she was delighted to see him smiling openly, caught up in the music and motion. When the dance concluded, Daniel escorted Daniel home with Mrs. Miller, who had declared herself ready to retire for the evening. Before leaving, he paused beside Charlotte. "I won't be long," he said quietly. "Save a dance for me." Charlotte nodded, her heart quickening at the warmth in his gray eyes. "I'll be here." True to his word, Daniel returned within the hour, his tie slightly loosened and his manner more relaxed than earlier. He found Charlotte seated with several other teachers from neighboring towns who had come for the celebration. "May I borrow Miss Abernathy for a dance?" He asked the group politely. The orchestra was playing a slower waltz now, the lantern light dimmed to create a more intimate atmosphere. Daniel's hand at Charlotte's waist seemed to rest more comfortably, and they moved together with greater ease than before. "Will he get settled in all right?" Charlotte asked. Daniel nodded. Out like a light the minute his head hit the pillow, all this excitement wore him out. He guided her smoothly around a corner of the dance floor. He can't stop talking about you, you know. Miss Abernathy says this, Miss Abernathy does that. I haven't heard him so animated in years. He's a special child, Charlotte replied. Thoughtful and kind. You've done well with him, Daniel. He shook his head slightly. Done my best, but it's been a hard road. Boy needs more than I can give him sometimes. What do you mean? Daniel was silent for a moment, guiding her through the steps of the dance before answering. A boy needs a mother's touch, gentleness, understanding. I can teach him to ride and rope and run the ranch, but there are things. He trailed off. Mary would have known how to handle his quiet spells, his nightmares. He has nightmares, Charlotte asked softly. Daniel nodded. About his mother dying. Not so much anymore, but for the first year or so, he'd wake up crying nearly every night. His expression darkened with the memory. Nothing worse than not being able to fix your child's pain. Charlotte's heart ached for both of them, the grieving boy and the father struggling to comfort him alone. Children are resilient, she said gently. With love and patience they heal. You've given him both. Daniel's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. You've been good for him, Charlotte. Since you came to town, he's lighter somehow, more like the boy he used to be. The waltz ended, but Daniel didn't immediately release her. They stood for a moment at the edge of the dance floor, the space between them charged with unspoken feelings. Would you walk with me for a bit? He asked suddenly. It's getting rather close in here. Outside, the night air was cool and refreshing after the warmth of the dance hall. Stars glittered overhead, and the distant sounds of the orchestra filtered through the walls. They strolled toward the town square, now empty of the day's festivities but still decorated with lanterns and bunting. I wanted to thank you, Daniel said as they walked. Not just for Lee, but for today. The performance, the dance. He hesitated. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed Founder's Day. I should be thanking you, Charlotte replied. You've made me feel welcome in Sacramento. It's not easy being a newcomer. I remember that feeling, Daniel said with a nod. When I first came here, I was just a young man with big dreams and empty pockets. Town wasn't much more than a collection of tents and hastily built shacks back then. How did you end up staying? Most gold seekers moved on, didn't they? Daniel's mouth quirked in a half smile. Never actually panned for gold. Came out with the rush, but saw right away that the real opportunity was in supplying the miners. Started with a small herd, built it up year by year. His expression grew more serious. Met Mary when she came out to teach school, just like you. She was so refined, so educated, never thought she'd look twice at a rough cattleman like me. But she did, Charlotte prompted gently. She did. His voice softened with the memory. Said she loved my ambition and my honesty. We built the ranch together happily. Thought we had all the time in the world. They had reached the small church, its white steeple illuminated by moonlight. Beyond it lay the cemetery, neat rows of markers visible in the silvery light. Daniel paused, looking toward the graveyard. I bring flowers every Sunday, he said quietly. Illy talks to her sometimes, tells her about school and his drawings. He shook his head. Never know what to say anymore. Charlotte touched his arm gently. I think she would be proud of you both, of the father you've been to Illy, of the man you are. Daniel turned to face her, his expression vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. There are days I'm not sure I'm doing right by him, raising a boy alone on a cattle ranch surrounded by cowboys and horses. He sighed. Mary had plans for his education, for his future. She wanted more for him than just following my footsteps. What do you want for him? Charlotte asked. Daniel considered the question seriously. Want him to have choices, to be educated enough to decide his own path. If that means ranching, fine. If not, he shrugged. Just want him to be happy, I suppose. They began walking again, making a slow circuit of the town square. The music from the dance had changed to something livelier, and occasional laughter drifted through the night air. May I ask you something personal, Charlotte? Daniel said after a comfortable silence, of course. What brought you all the way to Sacramento? Surely Boston had need of teachers, Charlotte smiled wryly. It did, but after my father died, the house felt empty, too full of memories. And Boston society has rather rigid expectations for unmarried women of a certain age. She paused. I saw the advertisement for a teacher here and something just called to me, a chance to start fresh, I suppose. Brave decision, Daniel observed, coming all this way alone. Or foolish, Charlotte admitted with a small laugh. There were moments on that train journey when I questioned my sanity. Do you regret it? He asked, watching her face closely. Coming here, Charlotte didn't hesitate. Not for a moment. I found purpose here. Wonderful students. She met his gaze. Good friends. Something in Daniel's expression shifted, a warmth kindling in his gray eyes. I'm glad, he said softly. Sacramento's better for having you here. They had circled back to the town hall, the sounds of the dance growing louder as they approached. Daniel paused before they reached the steps. Charlotte, he began, then seemed to reconsider his words. Would you and Mrs. Holloway care to join Ellie and me for Sunday dinner tomorrow, after church? Mrs. Miller makes a fine roast, and I know Ellie would be pleased. I'd like that very much, Charlotte replied, her heart beating a little faster at the invitation. Though I can't speak for Mrs. Holloway, she rarely leaves the boarding house on Sundays. Just you then, Daniel said, his expression lightening. If that's proper, Charlotte smiled. I believe a teacher dining with a student's family is entirely proper, Mr. Xavier. He returned her smile, offering his arm once more. Shall we return to the dance? I believe I'm improving with practice. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur of dancing and conversation. When Daniel escorted Charlotte back to the boarding house shortly before midnight, there was a new ease between them, a sense of understanding that hadn't existed before. At the door, he removed his hat, holding it respectfully in his hands. Thank you for a memorable evening, Miss Abernathy. Thank you, Mr. Xavier, she replied, matching his return to formality with a smile. I look forward to tomorrow, he nodded, his eyes lingering on her face. Good night, then. Good night. As Charlotte prepared for bed, she found herself humming one of the waltzes from the dance, her mind replaying the evening's conversations. There was something about Daniel Xavier that touched her deeply, his quiet strength, his devotion to his son, the glimpses of vulnerability beneath his reserved exterior. Sunday dawned bright and clear. After church services, Charlotte found Daniel and Ellie waiting by a handsome buggy, both dressed in their Sunday best. Miss Abernathy, Ellie called, waving enthusiastically. Pa let me drive the buggy into town today, with my hands right beside his on the reins, Daniel added with a wry smile. Boy thinks he's ready to drive a stagecoach now. The ride to the Xavier Ranch took about 30 minutes, following a well-maintained road that wound through rolling hills dotted with oak trees and grazing cattle. As they crested a final rise, Charlotte caught her first glimpse of the Flying X, a sprawling main house of whitewashed wood with a broad porch, surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses. It's beautiful, she said honestly. You've built something remarkable here, Daniel. He glanced at her, pleasure evident in his expression. Started with just the center part of the house. Added on as the years passed and the herd grew, Mary designed the porch and the gardens. He nodded toward a fenced area near the house, where late-blooming flowers still added color to the autumn landscape. Mrs. Miller, a plump, cheerful woman in her 60s, greeted them at the door with obvious pleasure. About time we had a guest for Sunday dinner, she declared, eyeing Charlotte with frank approval. Been telling Mr. Xavier for ages that this house needs more female company. Daniel cleared his throat. Mrs. Miller, perhaps you could show Miss Abernathy inside while Ellie and I see to the horse. The house interior was surprisingly refined for a bachelor rancher's dwelling, comfortable furnishings, polished wood floors covered with quality rugs, and walls adorned with framed landscapes. Charlotte noticed feminine touches throughout: embroidered cushions, delicate china displayed in a corner cabinet, vases of dried flowers. Mary's things, Mrs. Miller explained quietly, noticing Charlotte's interest. Mr. Xavier hasn't changed much since she passed, keeps everything just so. The dinner was excellent: roast beef, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables from the kitchen garden, and Mrs. Miller's famous apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, with Ellie eager to show Charlotte his room and his collections of arrowheads and interesting rocks after the meal. You indulge him, Miss Abernathy, Daniel observed as they watched the boy carefully arranging his treasures for display. Not many adults would show such interest in a child's gatherings. They're actually quite fascinating, Charlotte replied. Each one has a story and Ellie tells them well. He has a natural curiosity about the world. Later, while Mrs. Miller entertained Ellie in the kitchen with cookie baking, Daniel offered to show Charlotte the rest of the ranch. They walked together through the barn, where sleek horses peered curiously from stalls, then past the corrals where several cowboys were breaking in young colts. "This is where Lee spends most of his time when he's not at school," Daniel explained, nodding toward a smaller corral where a gentle-looking pinto mare grazed. "That's his horse, Daisy." Mary named her, said her spots looked like flowers scattered across snow. They continued to a small rise overlooking the ranch buildings and the vast pastures beyond, where herds of cattle dotted the landscape. The afternoon sun cast a golden light over everything, creating a scene of pastoral beauty. "I understand now," Charlotte said softly, "why you've stayed all these years. This land gets into one's soul, doesn't it?" Daniel nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon with quiet pride. "Mary used to say it was like looking at a piece of heaven." He glanced at Charlotte. "She'd have liked you, you know, your kindness to Ellie, your appreciation for learning and beauty." "I wish I could have known her," Charlotte replied honestly. "She must have been remarkable." "She was." Daniel's voice was soft with remembrance. "Strong but gentle, educated but practical. Could quote Shakespeare while mending fence." He smiled slightly. "She civilized me, I reckon, rough cattleman that I was." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching an eagle soar over the distant hills. "I should get you back to town before dark," Daniel said finally. "School tomorrow." As they walked back toward the house, Charlotte felt a curious reluctance to leave this peaceful place and the man beside her, whose quiet strength and vulnerability had touched something deep within her. The weeks following that Sunday dinner brought a subtle shift in Charlotte's relationship with both Xaviers. Ellie continued to blossom in school, volunteering more frequently and forming friendships with classmates who had previously found him too withdrawn. And Daniel began appearing regularly at school functions, offering assistance with repairs to the schoolhouse roof and donating lumber for new bookshelves. The town noticed, of course. Sacramento might be growing, but it still maintained the keen interest in personal affairs characteristic of smaller communities. Charlotte became aware of speculative glances and whispered conversations that ceased when she approached. Mrs. Holloway had even made a pointed comment about certain ranchers finding excuses to visit town more frequently than before. Charlotte tried to maintain a professional demeanor, particularly at school, but she couldn't deny the flutter in her heart whenever Daniel appeared, or the way their conversations had gradually deepened to include shared confidences and moments of unexpected laughter. November brought colder weather and preparations for Thanksgiving. The school planned a special program, with each child sharing something they were thankful for and contributing to a communal feast. Charlotte was reviewing her lesson plans one evening when a knock at the boarding house door interrupted her work. Mrs. Holloway's voice drifted up the stairs. "Miss Abernathy, visitor for you." Charlotte descended to find Daniel Xavier standing awkwardly in the entryway, hat in hand and a small wrapped package tucked under his arm. "Mr. Xavier," she greeted him, conscious of Mrs. Holloway's curious presence. "This is unexpected. Apologies for calling so late," he said formally. "I was in town on business and thought you might like to see what Ellie's been working on for the Thanksgiving program." Mrs. Holloway sniffed audibly. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything, Miss Abernathy. Door stays open, mind." When the older woman had departed, Charlotte gestured to the small parlor. "Please come in." Daniel seemed too large for the delicate furniture of the boarding house sitting room, his broad shoulders and tall frame making the settee look diminutive as he sat carefully on its edge. "I hope I'm not interrupting your evening," he said, glancing at the papers in her hand. "Just reviewing lessons," Charlotte assured him. "What has Ellie been working on?" Daniel unwrapped the package, revealing several sheets of paper covered with careful drawings. "He's been staying up late every night this week, working on these. Wanted them to be a surprise for the program, but I thought you might want to see them beforehand." The drawings depicted scenes of Thanksgiving pilgrims and Native Americans sharing a meal, a family gathered around a table, children playing outside a log cabin. The final page showed a small boy and a tall man standing before a simple grave decorated with flowers, a female angel hovering above them. "This is how Ellie gives thanks for his mother each year," Daniel explained quietly. "We visit her grave, bring chrysanthemums, they were her favorite fall flower." Charlotte touched the drawing gently. "These are beautiful, Daniel. He has real talent. Mary's gift," he replied. "She could make a few lines on paper come to life." He hesitated. "There's something else I wanted to ask you. The ranch hands always join us for Thanksgiving dinner. Most don't have family nearby. I wondered if you might like to join us as well. Mrs. Miller says she'd welcome another woman's help with the preparations." The invitation touched Charlotte deeply. "I'd be honored," she said softly. "Thank you." Daniel's expression lightened. "Good, that's good." He seemed about to say more when Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway. "It's getting late, Miss Abernathy," she announced pointedly. "And tomorrow is a school day." Daniel rose immediately. "Of course." "My apologies for keeping you, Miss Abernathy." He gathered the drawings, rewrapping them carefully. "I'll heavily bring these to school tomorrow for the program." At the door, out of Mrs. Holloway's earshot, he added quietly, "I'm glad you'll join us for Thanksgiving. Ellie will be pleased." "And you?" Charlotte asked impulsively. "Are you pleased as well?" His gray eyes warmed. "Very much so, Charlotte, very much indeed." Thanksgiving at the Flying X was a joyous occasion. The long dining table extended to accommodate a dozen ranch hands, Mrs. Miller, Charlotte, and the Xaviers. The food was plentiful, the conversation lively, and the atmosphere warm despite the snow that had begun falling outside the windows. After dinner, while the ranch hands retired to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Miller tackled the mountain of dishes, Daniel invited Charlotte to join him and Ellie in the study, a comfortable room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large stone fireplace. "This was Mother's favorite room," Ellie explained, curling up in a worn leather chair with a familiar ease that suggested it was his regular spot. "Pa says she used to read here every evening." Daniel nodded, stoking the fire. "Had to order books special from San Francisco for her. She'd read them aloud to me sometimes in the evenings." His expression softened at the memory. "Had the most beautiful reading voice you ever heard." Charlotte noticed a small trunk in the corner of the room, its brass fittings polished to a shine. Following her gaze, Daniel said quietly, "That was hers. Her special things, books from Kentucky, letters from her family, her ribbons and such." Ellie's head came up at that. "Show Miss Abernathy the blue ribbon, Pa." Daniel hesitated, then crossed to the trunk and opened it carefully. From within, he withdrew a length of blue satin ribbon, somewhat faded but still beautiful. He held it almost reverently in his large, calloused hands. "Mary wore this every Sunday and on special occasions," he explained, his voice soft. "Brought it with her from Kentucky. Said it reminded her of home." Ellie slipped from his chair and came to stand beside his father. "Mother wore it in her hair like this," he demonstrated, miming someone tying back their hair. "Pa keeps it safe now." Daniel carefully returned the ribbon to the trunk. "Just a small thing," he said, almost apologetically, "but it meant something to her so." "It's not small at all," Charlotte said softly. "It's a treasure." The evening concluded with Ellie falling asleep by the fire, prompting Daniel to carry him upstairs to bed. When he returned, he found Charlotte standing by the window, watching the snow fall in the glow of the porch lantern. "It's beautiful here," she said as he joined her. "So peaceful." "It can be," he agreed. "Other times it's backbreaking work and worry about drought or disease in the herd." He glanced at her. "Not the genteel life you knew in Boston." "Boston wasn't always genteel," Charlotte replied with a small smile. "And there's a satisfaction in building something with your own hands, isn't there? In seeing the tangible results of your work." Daniel studied her face in the firelight. "You understand that?" "My father taught me. He always said there was no greater joy than creating something lasting." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the snow transform the landscape into a pristine white canvas. "I should get you back to town before the roads become impassable," Daniel said finally, though he made no move toward the door. "Yes," Charlotte agreed, equally reluctant to end the evening. "Thank you for including me today. It was wonderful." Daniel's expression grew serious. "Charlotte, He paused, seeming to search for words. "These past months since you came to Sacramento, it's been good having you here, for Ellie of course, but also—" He hesitated again. "For me," Charlotte felt her heart quicken. "It's been good for me too, Daniel." He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I never expected to feel this way again," he said quietly. "After Mary, I thought that part of my life was over." "And now," Charlotte whispered, Now I find myself thinking about you when you're not here, wondering what you'd say about things. Wanting to share moments with you." His voice deepened. "I care for you, Charlotte, more than I thought possible." Charlotte reached out, touching his hand gently. "I care for you too, Daniel, very much." He turned his palm to clasp her fingers in his, the contact sending warmth coursing through her. For a long moment they stood connected, the weight of their admission hanging in the air between them. "We should go," Daniel said finally, though he didn't release her hand. "Before the snow gets worse." The ride back to town was quiet, both wrapped in their own thoughts and the significance of what had passed between them. When they reached the boarding house, Daniel helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist. "Good night, Charlotte," he said softly. "Good night, Daniel." As she watched him drive away, Charlotte felt as if something precious and fragile had been placed in her, keeping a new beginning, unexpected but welcome. Winter settled over Sacramento with a series of snowstorms that sometimes made travel between the ranch and town difficult. Still, Daniel found reasons to visit regularly, often bringing Ellie to town for supplies or taking Charlotte on Sunday drives when weather permitted. Their relationship deepened with each meeting, built on shared values, mutual respect, and a growing affection that neither tried to hide. Christmas approached, bringing with it school pageants, church activities, and festive preparations. Charlotte threw herself into planning a special holiday performance for her students, while also helping with the church's charitable efforts for less fortunate families. One bitterly cold afternoon a week before Christmas, Charlotte was decorating the schoolroom with paper chains and evergreen boughs when the door burst open, bringing with it a flurry of snow and a breathless Daniel Xavier. "Miss Abernathy," he gasped, his face red from running and cold. "You have to come quick. Pa's been hurt." Charlotte's heart dropped. "What happened? Where is he?" "At Doc Turner's. There was an accident with the cattle. A bull got loose and charged Pa's horse. He fell in the horse." Ellie's voice broke. There was so much blood. Charlotte grabbed her coat and gloves. "Let's go, Ellie." Dr. Turner's office was on the other side of town, a small building attached to his home. Charlotte and Ellie hurried through the snow-covered streets, the boy nearly running to keep up with her long strides. "He'll be all right, won't he?" Ellie asked, his voice small. "Doc Turner can fix anything, right?" Charlotte squeezed his shoulder. "Your father is the strongest man I know, Ellie, and yes, Dr. Turner is very skilled." The doctor's waiting room was empty except for a nervous-looking ranch hand pacing by the window. He nodded at Ellie and touched his hat to Charlotte. "Miss Abernathy, boy said he was fetching you." "How is Mr. Xavier?" Charlotte asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The cowboy shook his head. "Doc's still working on him. Bull spooked Atlas. Something fierce. Horse fell right on the boss. Broke some ribs for sure, maybe worse." The door to the examination room opened, and Dr. Turner emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression. "Ellie," he acknowledged the boy with a nod. "Miss Abernathy. Didn't expect to see you here." "How is he?" Charlotte asked, her heart pounding. "Stubborn as ever," the doctor replied with a tired smile. 4 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and a gash on his head that needed 12 stitches. He's lucky the bull didn't gore him and the horse didn't crush him completely." Ellie's face had gone pale. "Can I see him?" Dr. Turner hesitated. "He's resting now, but yes, for a minute. Don't tire him out." The ranch hand touched Ellie's shoulder. "I'll wait out here, boy. You go on in." As Ellie disappeared into the examination room, Dr. Turner turned to Charlotte. "He's asking for you too, Miss Abernathy. Man's half delirious with pain, but insisted on speaking with you." Charlotte followed Ellie into the small room where Daniel lay on a narrow bed, his torso heavily bandaged, one arm in a sling, and a white dressing covering part of his forehead. His face was ashen beneath his tan, but his eyes brightened slightly when he saw them. "There's my boy," he said hoarsely, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace. "And Charlotte, you came." Ellie approached the bed cautiously. "Are you going to be all right, Pa?" Daniel reached out with his good hand to touch his son's cheek. "Course I am. Take more than an ornery bull to finish me off." He winced as he shifted position. "You did good getting help, son." Charlotte moved to stand beside Ellie, her heart aching at the sight of Daniel's injuries. "You gave us quite a scare, Mr. Xavier." His gray eyes met hers, a depth of feeling in them that made her breath catch. "Sorry about that, not how I planned to spend Christmas week." Dr. Turner reappeared in the doorway. That's enough visiting for now. Mr. Xavier needs rest, and I need to finish bandaging those ribs properly. Can Pa come home? Illy asked anxiously. The doctor shook his head. Not tonight. He needs to stay here where I can watch for any signs of internal bleeding. Tomorrow, if he's stable, we'll see about moving him. Illy's face fell. But I can't leave him here alone. You'll go back to the ranch with Jim, Daniel said firmly, though the effort of speaking clearly cost him. Mrs. Miller will look after you. I'll be home before you know it. I can stay with him, Charlotte offered impulsively. At least until you're settled, doctor. Daniel started to protest, but was silenced by another wave of pain. Dr. Turner considered the offer. It would help to have someone keep an eye on him. He's not supposed to move much, and knowing him, he'll try to get up the minute my back is turned. He glanced at Charlotte. Are you sure, Miss Abernathy, it's not exactly proper? I'll sit right here in this chair, Charlotte said firmly. Proprieties be hanged, he shouldn't be alone. A ghost of a smile touched Daniel's lips. No use arguing with her, Doc, stubborn as they come. After Illy had been persuaded to return to the ranch with Jim and Dr. Turner had finished his treatment, Charlotte found herself alone with Daniel in the small room. A lamp burned low on the bedside table, casting shadows across his pain-lined face. You don't have to stay, he said quietly. I'll be fine. Charlotte pulled her chair closer to the bed. I'm not going anywhere, Daniel Xavier, so you might as well stop arguing and rest. He managed a weak chuckle that immediately turned into a wince. Yes, madam. After a moment, he added softly, thank you for coming. For being here, Illy. I came for both of you, Charlotte replied, carefully taking his uninjured hand in hers. You frightened me half to death. Frightened myself, he admitted. All I could think about was Illy, who would raise him if... He trailed off, his eyes growing distant. Mary used to worry about that. What would happen to him if something happened to me out on the range? Nothing happened, Charlotte said firmly. You're going to be fine. Daniel's fingers tightened around hers. Charlotte, I need to tell you something. When that bull charged, when I was lying there thinking I might not make it. He paused, gathering strength. I realized I couldn't leave things unsaid between us. Charlotte's heart raced. Daniel, I love you, he said simply, have done for months now. Should have told you sooner, but I was afraid. Afraid of betraying Mary's memory, afraid of changing what Illy and I had built. He took a shaky breath. But lying there in the dirt, all I could think was that I might die without ever telling you how much you've come to mean to me. Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes. I love you too, Daniel, so much. His face softened, the lines of pain easing slightly. You do, with all my heart. He closed his eyes briefly, an expression of peace settling over his features. Then I'm a fortunate man, injuries and all. Charlotte leaned forward and gently pressed her lips to his forehead, careful to avoid his bandages. Rest now. We'll have plenty of time to talk when you're stronger. Daniel recovered slowly over the following weeks, first at Dr. Turner's and then at the ranch. Charlotte divided her time between her teaching duties and visiting the Flying X, often bringing schoolwork for Illy, and staying to help Mrs. Miller with household tasks. Christmas was a quiet affair at the ranch that year, with Daniel still confined largely to bed or a chair by the fire. Yet there was a warmth and joy to the celebration that transcended the circumstances, Illy's delight in the new drawing materials Charlotte had given him. Mrs. Miller's magnificent feast, despite the reduced company, and the simple pleasure of being together. On Christmas evening, after Illy had gone to bed and Mrs. Miller had retired to her quarters, Charlotte sat with Daniel in the study, the room warm and festive with pine boughs and candles. I have something for you, Daniel said, reaching carefully into his robe pocket. Meant to give it to you properly, but he shrugged his good shoulder. Plans change. He held out a small velvet box. Charlotte took it with trembling fingers and opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small pearl. It was my mother's, Daniel explained, not fancy but sturdy. Like our life would be. He met her eyes steadily. Charlotte Abernathy, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of making this house a home again, of being a mother to Illy, of building a life with me? Tears of happiness filled Charlotte's eyes. Yes, Daniel, yes, with all my heart. The town of Sacramento received the news of their engagement with a mixture of surprise and approval. Some claimed they'd seen it coming from the moment the new schoolteacher arrived. Others expressed astonishment that the reserved Daniel Xavier had opened his heart again. Most, however, simply offered their congratulations and best wishes. Mrs. Holloway sniffed disapprovingly at first but eventually unbent enough to help Charlotte begin assembling a trousseau. "At least he's a man of property," she conceded, "and the boy needs a mother's hand, that's certain." The wedding was planned for June, after the school term ended. Charlotte would continue teaching until then, though she spent most weekends at the ranch, gradually transitioning into her role as mistress of the house and Ellie's stepmother-to-be. Ellie had received the news of their engagement with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "Does this mean you'll be my new mother?" he had asked Charlotte, his expression solemn. "I could never replace your mother, Ellie," Charlotte had answered carefully. "But I would be honored to be a second mother to you, to love and care for you alongside your father if you'll have me." The boy had considered this seriously, then nodded. "I think Mother would like that. She always said Pa worked too hard and needed someone to make him laugh more." Spring arrived with its usual flurry of activity, calving season at the ranch, end-of-term preparations at the school, and wedding plans that grew more elaborate as the women of Sacramento took Charlotte under their collective wing. Daniel recovered fully from his injuries, though he admitted to Charlotte that the accident had left him with a new awareness of his own mortality and a deeper appreciation for each day. "Life's fragile," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Mary taught me that, and I nearly forgot. Won't make that mistake again." May brought warm weather and the final preparations for both the end of the school year and the wedding. Charlotte found herself increasingly torn between her duties as a teacher and her anticipated role as Mrs. Daniel Xavier. "You could continue teaching if you wanted," Daniel suggested one Sunday as they drove back to town. "I know how much you love it." Charlotte smiled, touched by his understanding. "Perhaps someday, but for now I think the ranch and Ellie need my full attention." She squeezed his hand. "And so do you." The week before the wedding, Charlotte was packing her belongings at the boarding house when a knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find Ellie standing there, looking unusually nervous. "Ellie, I wasn't expecting you today. Is your father with you?" The boy shook his head. "Jim brought me into town for supplies and I asked to stop here." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I wanted to talk to you alone." "Of course," Charlotte said, inviting him in. "What is it?" Ellie reached into his pocket and withdrew something wrapped in a handkerchief. Carefully, he unfolded the cloth to reveal the blue satin ribbon, Mary Xavier's cherished possession. "Pa doesn't know I took this," he admitted. "It was in Mother's trunk." Charlotte stared at the ribbon in confusion. "Ellie, you shouldn't have. I want you to have it," he interrupted, holding it out to her. "Mother's ribbon. For your hair at the wedding." Charlotte's breath caught. "Oh, Ellie, I couldn't possibly, please," the boy said earnestly. "I talked to Mother about it at her grave. I think she'd want you to have it." His gray eyes, so like his father's, were solemn. "You'll need this more than me." Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes as she understood the significance of the gesture, not just a ribbon, but an acceptance, a blessing of sorts. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. Ellie nodded. "Pa says you're not replacing Mother, just making our family whole again, but I think—" He paused, struggling to articulate his thoughts. "I think maybe Mother sent you to us to take care of Pa and me." Charlotte knelt and hugged the boy tightly. "Thank you, Ellie. This means more to me than you can know." "Don't tell Pa yet," Ellie requested as he pulled back. "I want it to be a surprise when he sees you wearing it." "It will be our secret," Charlotte promised, carefully folding the ribbon and placing it in her jewelry box. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the June sun casting a golden glow over Sacramento. The church was filled with townspeople and ranchers from the surrounding area, all gathered to witness the union of the respected cattleman and the beloved schoolteacher. In the small anteroom of the church, Charlotte stood in her wedding gown, a creation of ivory silk with a modest train and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Patterson was adjusting her veil when there was a knock at the door. "Miss Abernathy," Daniel's voice called. "I know it's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding, but Ellie's with me. He has something to say." Charlotte smiled at Mrs. Patterson, who shook her head indulgently and went to open the door a crack. "Bride's decent, but you stay outside, Mr. Xavier. The boy can come in." Ellie slipped into the room, handsome in his new suit with his hair slicked back. He stopped short when he saw Charlotte, his eyes widening. "You look like an angel," he said with childlike directness. "Wait till Pa sees you." Charlotte smiled, touching her hair where Mary's blue ribbon had been woven into her upswept curls. "Do you think he'll notice the ribbon?" Ellie nodded solemnly. "He notices everything about Mother's things." He hesitated. "That's what I came to tell you. I told Pa about the ribbon this morning." He wasn't mad, but he got real quiet. "I was afraid maybe I'd done wrong." Charlotte's heart sank. "Oh, Ellie, perhaps I shouldn't." "No," the boy interrupted. "He said to tell you that he thinks it's fitting. That Mother would be pleased." Ellie's expression brightened. "And he said to give you this." From his pocket, he withdrew a small folded note. Charlotte opened it with trembling fingers. In Daniel's bold handwriting were just a few words. "Mary would be honored, so am I. With all my love, Daniel." Tears threatened to spill and ruin her carefully applied powder. "Thank you, Ellie," she whispered, hugging the boy carefully to avoid crushing her gown. "You'd better go join your father now. I'll see you both at the altar." The ceremony was simple but beautiful. When Charlotte walked down the aisle on Mayor Simmons' arm, standing in for her late father, she saw Daniel's eyes widen and then fill with emotion as he noticed the blue ribbon in her hair. Beside him, Ellie beamed with pride and happiness. Their vows were spoken clearly, their voices steady with certainty and joy. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Daniel kissed her with gentle reverence, Charlotte felt that her life had come full circle from loss and loneliness in Boston to love and family in Sacramento. The celebration afterward at the Flying X was the social event of the season. The ranch hands had decorated the yard with flowers and lanterns, and tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by seemingly every woman in Sacramento. Mrs. Miller, presiding over it all with teary-eyed happiness, declared it the finest wedding feast the county had ever seen. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Daniel found Charlotte sitting on the porch steps, taking a moment's respite from the festivities. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Happy, Mrs. Xavier?" he asked softly. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "And you?" He brought her hand to his lips. "Happier than I thought I'd ever be again." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the celebration continue in the yard, Ellie showing his school friends the new foal in the barn. Ranch hands dancing with town girls to the music of fiddles and guitars. Neighbors laughing and sharing stories. "Thank you," Daniel said suddenly, his fingers gently touching the blue ribbon in her hair. "For understanding what this means, for accepting Mary's place in our lives, not trying to erase her. She'll always be part of you and Ellie," Charlotte said softly, "as she should be." "I would never want to change that." Daniel's arm tightened around her. "You've brought life back to this ranch, Charlotte, to Ellie, to me." He kissed her temple gently. "I never thought I'd love again after Mary died, didn't think it was possible, but you showed me that the heart can heal, can grow large enough to hold both grief and new joy." Charlotte turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "And you've given me what I always wanted but never truly expected, to find a family, a home, a purpose beyond just myself." "Mother would have liked you," Ellie's voice came from the steps below them. He sat down on Charlotte's other side, leaning against her contentedly. "She always said Pa needed someone strong and kind." Daniel reached across to ruffle his son's hair. "Your mother was a wise woman, son." "Are you sad she's not here?" Ellie asked, his young face serious in the lantern light. Daniel considered the question thoughtfully. "I miss her every day," he said honestly, "but I'm not sad right now. Right now, I'm grateful for the time we had with her and for the blessing of having Charlotte with us now." He smiled at his new wife. "Life's about moving forward, son, while keeping the best parts of the past in your heart." Charlotte felt tears of happiness sting her eyes as she sat between these two remarkable males who had become her family, the solemn, thoughtful boy and the strong, tender man. Above them, the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and from the yard came the sounds of music and laughter. "Come on," Daniel said, standing and offering his hands to both of them. "I believe I owe my wife a wedding dance." As they moved to rejoin the celebration, Charlotte felt the blue ribbon in her hair, a symbol of continuity, of love that transcended loss, of a family's healing. And she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that she had found her true home at last. Epilogue: 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter echoed across the yard of the Flying X, where 15-year-old Daniel Xavier was teaching his 3-year-old brother Thomas to ride a gentle pony. From the porch, Charlotte watched them, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their third child, a girl, according to Dr. Turner, would arrive before winter. "Not too fast, Illy," she called, though she trusted her stepson's judgment completely. In the 5 years since their marriage, Illy had grown from a solemn child into a confident young man, excelling in his studies, and showing every sign of following in his father's footsteps as a skilled rancher. The sound of a horse approaching drew her attention to the road, where Daniel was returning from a trip to Sacramento. His face broke into a broad smile when he saw her, and he dismounted quickly, handing the reins to a waiting ranch hand. "Everything all right?" he asked, climbing the porch steps to kiss her. "You should be resting," Charlotte laughed. "I'm pregnant, not ill, and I could hardly stay inside on such a beautiful day." She nodded toward the corral. "Besides, your sons are having their riding lesson." Daniel's expression softened as he watched his boys. "Illy's good with him, has patience." He slipped an arm around Charlotte's waist. Like his mother, both his mothers, in fact, Charlotte leaned against him, feeling the solid strength that had been her anchor these past 5 years. "Mary would be proud of him," she said softly. "He's growing into a fine young man." "She would," Daniel agreed, "and she'd be grateful to you for helping raise him." He placed his hand over hers on her belly, "for giving him siblings, too." Little Thomas had spotted his father and was waving excitedly from atop the pony. "Papa, look, I'm riding." "I see you, son," Daniel called. "Fine job." As the afternoon shadows lengthened, the family gathered for supper in the dining room that Charlotte had gradually redecorated over the years, blending her own taste with preserved elements of Mary's style. The blue ribbon, now somewhat faded, hung framed on the wall alongside family portraits: Mary with infant Illy, Daniel and Charlotte on their wedding day, Illy holding baby Thomas, the whole family together at last year's Founders' Day. Later, after Thomas had been put to bed and Illy had retired to his room to finish a school assignment, Daniel and Charlotte sat on the porch swing in the gathering dusk, as had become their evening ritual. "Saw Jim Jenkins in town today," Daniel mentioned, his arm comfortable around her shoulders. "Says his oldest boy is sweet on Sarah Miller, thinking of asking for her hand come Christmas." Charlotte smiled. "Sarah told me as much last Sunday. She's quite determined to accept him." Daniel chuckled. "Not much happens in this county you don't hear about, does it?" "One of the benefits of being married to Sacramento's most respected rancher," Charlotte teased. "People tell me things." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Charlotte felt a rush of gratitude for the life they had built together, the blend of old and new, the honoring of the past while embracing the future. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Charlotte took his hand and placed it on her belly, where their daughter had just kicked vigorously. "I was thinking about names for this little one," she said. "What would you think of Mary for her middle name?" Daniel's eyes grew soft in the fading light. "You'd want that?" "I would," Charlotte replied simply, "to honor the woman who came before me, who loved you and Illy first, who's still part of our family in so many ways." Daniel drew her close, his voice husky with emotion. "I don't deserve you, Charlotte Xavier." "Perhaps not," she teased, "but you're stuck with me nonetheless." As night settled over the Flying X, bringing with it the peaceful sounds of a ranch at rest, Charlotte felt the gentle weight of the life she and Daniel had created together, a life built on respect for the past and hope for the future, on quiet strength and enduring love. In her jewelry box upstairs lay a small piece of the blue ribbon, saved to give to their daughter someday, along with the story of 2 mothers, 1 family, and love that transcended even death. It was a legacy Charlotte was proud to continue, this weaving together of lives and memories, creating a tapestry rich with meaning and beauty. "I love you, Daniel Xavier," she whispered, resting her head against his shoulder. "And I love you," he replied, his voice a rumble beneath her ear. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come."